In terms of organization, in terms of how USTR approaches insurance issues, as you may know, financial services that are dealt with in trade negotiations are divided into three areas: banking, securities, and insurance. And historically, certainly even from before my time, USTR has taken the lead on the insurance portion of those issues. And we generally, in financial services negotiations, we co-chair with Treasury, and then Treasury takes the lead on banking and securities. The second general point I wanted to make is that insurance, of course, covers non-life and life insurance, and we really do try in our negotiations to pay adequate and equal attention to both sides, so that when we're getting commitments, it's not a trade-off of one against the other, because we see both sides being very important. And the third thing, general comment I wanted to make that influences our approach in this area, as you I'm sure well know, that insurance in the United States is not regulated at the federal level. So what we're dealing with is a myriad of state regulations, and so that also influences how we conduct our negotiations, how we gather information to conduct those negotiations. And so groups like the National Association of Insurance Commissioners are a key source of information for us, as well as various private sector organizations like BRADS, as well as individual companies, in addition to country regulators. So just by way of background, that's kind of the universe that we're dealing with when the U.S. government approaches insurance issues. I wanted to spend a few minutes in terms of the framework for the barriers and commitments that we seek to address those barriers in terms of our trade agreements, whether they be multilateral, bilateral, or regional. And in the services context, again, some of you may be familiar, others may not, there are a variety of modes through which a service may be supplied, and there are basically four modes. There's cross-border consumption abroad, where an individual, a national, travels to another country and then consumes that service there. Mode 3, which basically covers investment, and Mode 4, which covers the movement of persons. And typically, the issue in that area involves visas and whether or not one country has difficulty getting its professionals, particularly in the insurance sector, into another country. In terms of the kinds of commitments we seek to get in the insurance area, we seek to get good commitments in all those areas, although we really focus not so much on the Mode 4 side. Generally, in trade negotiations, that's handled more on a horizontal basis, especially in the multilateral context. So for insurance, we would be really focusing on the first three modes: cross-border, consumption abroad, and Mode 3. And actually, it's really Modes 1 and 3, the cross-border and the investment abroad, that are really the key areas where we've run into barriers and seek to get commitments. The other two areas I wanted to highlight, again, sort of setting out a framework for how we approach negotiations. We generally, in terms of financial services and specifically in terms of insurance, seek to get commitments for greater transparency. And this is very important, particularly in the insurance area, because the commitments we seek are not only for the general notice and comment kind of provisions that we want generically across the board for all services, but it's also with respect to the licensing process, because that often is where we run into many problems, or hear from the private sector that they run into many problems about the lack of transparency. What kind of requirements are applied? What is the status of their application? Is the government actually required to get back to them on the status of their application? And finally, if it's not granted, what are the reasons for denial, and is there appeal? So that's a very important part of the kind of commitments we seek. And then finally, we also seek additional specific commitments. For example, in this area, the right to manage portfolios, and particularly mutual funds, is one area where we've sought additional specific commitments. And so that's kind of the framework that we use in approaching specific barriers as we tackle them.